Dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, da, da. Going tubeless.
Alright, so I'm going to be switching out my slicker tires for some tires with a little more tread. I should note that these wheels come tubeless ready. And what that means is that the rims already have rim tape, which seals the rim. But you can buy rim tape at any bike shop. Just make sure you get the proper size for your rim. So first things first, I'm deflating the tire, getting all the air out, and then going to use some tire levers to remove the tire. These tire levers I have are super nifty because they'll clip into the spoke, and then I can use the second one to remove the whole tire. Now I am spraying down the rim because you want it to be really clean, no residue, so that the tire can properly seal. I use some waterless cleaning spray and just a clean rag. And double checking my tape to making sure that it's still sealed properly. There's no air bubbles or any holes where the sealant could escape. Also making sure that near the valve it's still well sealed. So I like to make sure that the labeling on the tire lines up with the valve. That way, if anything does happen or I get any kind of punctures, I can kind of keep some orientation in terms of figuring out where the obstruction was and checking my rim as well when I take the tire off. This is where strong hands come in. New tires are tight and a pain.
"12 seconds later."
Yeah, this one took me a while. A lot of leverage. There's a couple different techniques.
Later.
But over time, just stretching it over and over. Sometimes it helps to leave the tire in the sun a bit, so it's more malleable.
4 moments later.
Sometimes it just takes patience.
Eventually.
The old school palm roll, just rolling it into submission. Woohoo! So I like to make sure that the tread is actually pointed in the right direction, making sure that both lips of the tire are in the kind of middle seat of the rim, but yet still around the valve. Because now I'm going to remove the valve core. You can use needle nose pliers or there's little removal tools. And I'm going to put some sealant through that valve. So I want to make sure the tire's totally around that valve. This thing is super cool. It's basically a pressurized chamber, so I can use a normal bike pump to pump as much air as I need. And I check the tire for what PSI I'll need. And for the chamber, I go higher than that PSI because it might take a little more air than what the tire is requiring for it to actually seat. So I take about 1 to 2 ounces of sealant, and I use an injector because that way I can get the measurement super accurate and make sure all the sealant gets inside the valve. Twist it on. And once all the sealant's in, I get the valve core, put it back in. And then there's also this neat little adapter for Presta valves that I'm getting onto the valve stems so that I can put in some compressed air. The reason you have to use compressed air is because you need rapid air to fill the tire and get it to seat into position. You could sit there with a bike pump, but the air will just leak and you'll just get a really good arm workout. So using CO2 cartridges or an air compressor or this neat little air chamber will get the air popping. So once I've got the air in the tire, make sure to spin it around a bit, get the sealant all moved around. And then we're gonna move on to the rear. Stay hydrated, folks. So we're gonna kind of speed through the rear setup, but it's essentially the same idea. Gonna deflate the tire. We're gonna get that old slick tire off. So why tubeless? I ride tubeless for 2 reasons. One, it's actually kind of less stuff you have to carry. You end up using a lot less product, not having to carry a bunch of tubes. All I really need are plugs, like you would use in your car tire, and a couple of CO2 cartridges. And the other reason is because it's not as hindering as getting a flat with tubes are. Because I could get a goat head in my tire and not even realize it until 2 days later. Because that sealant really plugs around the hole. So that's less stress while I'm on a ride. I can keep riding for longer distances without having to worry about my tire. But of course, I always check them when I get home to make sure I haven't hit anything that's going to be a problem later. But it's nice to be able to just fix it at home and not be stuck out on the road. Of course, I can still take a spare tube for longer rides, just in case I don't happen to have enough plugs or I run out of CO2 cartridges. At least I have a tube. But for the most part, it's just less stuff to deal with. And if you're trying to shed grams, I guess it's a little less weight. Although you do have sealant in your tires, so. So once I get air into this rear tire, all I've got to do is top it off with a bike pump. Make sure that it's up to the proper PSI. And then I'll install the wheel back on, make sure I get some spinning done so that the sealant will really cover the entirety of the tire and the rim. And then the most important thing is to take it out for a test ride. Make sure that sealant really spins around and spreads around, and that you maintain that air pressure. And I'll also check it later in the day and the next day to make sure it's really holding up. And now we're tubeless. Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the Black Foxes and to myself at rockcognizant on Instagram.